sound speeds, and welcome back to the Speed Bumps podcast. Now, one thing you're going to notice straight out of the gate is that this episode is going to sound a little bit different. The reason why is because one question I've received quite a few times already is, what would happen if I tried to use something like a GoPro or the Insta360 X3 like I'm using right now, but without some sort of a plant microphone or audio that sounds more professional, like what we normally do? So I thought about it and said, you know what, it's worth experimenting with. Now, I'm not going to do it in the regular sense. Like right now, what you're listening to right now is the camera microphone. And so this is just the raw coming from the camera, the way you would expect it to be. And of course, I do speak loud. But what it's going to be for the rest of this episode is I'm going to take the audio from this camera, run it through Adobe Podcast AI, and then I'm going to see if I can process it a little bit in Reaper to get rid of some of the roboticness, see if I can make it sound decent, get rid of perhaps a little bit of the distortions that happen. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I want you to tell me in the comments below if this sounds like something that we achieved. I'm going to probably have my own opinions, and I don't honestly know how well this is going to go. Maybe this entire episode will be unbearable, and you say, look, you need to stop listening to people. But hey, that's part of what we do here is we test things, right? And you have ears that I trust, especially because you are not only a viewer of a sound-related channel, a channel that does not ask members to like, share, subscribe, and donate. I simply just put it out there, and if you want to do any of those things, you will. So that's the way I basically, basically run the channel. So if you have an interest in participating, that's what you do. And that's the reason why I trust your thoughts and opinions. Because you are here because you want to be, not because I'm telling you to click a button or whatever. So I want your thoughts and opinions. Right now, this is not sounding spectacular by any means. It's just a camera mic on the Insta360. And this is picking up my voice inside the car. I'm not using a plant microphone or anything up there. It's just me raw in the way that I would normally sound going straight into this camera. Now, we're about to get into our first topic, and from here on, I'm going to try processing it, and I want you to tell me in the comments if it's bearable or not. What do you think? If you were listening to someone else, if you were listening to a show and someone were to try to use Adobe Podcast AI, for example, to process and compensate for a non-treated environment, not having an ideal microphone, because obviously you don't need to use something like Adobe Podcast AI if you're in a sound-treated environment and you have a microphone right in front of your face. You don't need to do that then. But in this circumstance, is it going to be useful? Let's get into our first topic and see. Ever since I started this channel, I have been answering one question over and over again, and that is, Alan, some of the things you say is different than what I'm seeing on other channels. And so please justify your thoughts and opinions on something. And there's one particular topic that comes up quite often. I thought I would actually publicly say it in a forum that people might actually listen to, like this podcast. And that is, if you buy an audio interface, then why is it that I recommend getting one that has at least about 65 or more decibels of gain? Well, let me explain to you my thoughts on this. And yes, it is not completely necessary. It's just that it is my recommendation that someone do that. And there's a few different reasons. The first is that usually if you're going to get more than about 60 dB of gain, it's probably going to be a little bit more of a premium type interface. It's going to have better specs. Now, those specs include having increased gain, because in the world of testing out preamp quality in digital audio interfaces, or even if you're going to test analog, you want to measure it with your gain all the way up at its maximum. So if you have an interface with, let's say, 60 dB of gain, and you have an interface with, let's say, 75 dB of gain, and you maximize the gain all the way up, full blast, and then you use a 150 ohm dummy load to test out the preamp quality, and let's just say the noise floor is the exact same. If the noise floor is the same on an interface with negative 60 dB, with 60 decibels of gain, and one that has 75 decibels of gain, and you are rocking something like the Shure SM7B, or any dynamic microphone for that matter, if you were doing that, then what do you think is going to give you the better results? The interface with 60 decibels of gain, or the interface with 75 decibels of gain? Considering that you don't have to take the interface with 75 decibels of gain all the way up to its maximum, you're going to probably get better results, all things equal. Like if the interface If both interfaces have, let's say, an EIN of negative 129, and those are the exact same at maximum gain, you're probably, if you don't have to take the gain up all the way, you're probably going to have a little bit better noise performance on the interface that goes up higher. That's the big reason why I recommend that. Because if you need to take a microphone a little farther away from you, you have the gain to actually play with a little bit in that regards. Now, usually, we always talk about dynamic microphones with audio interfaces and testing out your preamp. So the reason why is because condenser microphones have 48 volt phantom power, which, amongst other things, adds to the amplification that you get coming out of a condenser. So usually a condenser microphone is negative 32 dB or so, but it can range anywhere between like negative 40 and negative 20 plus or minus. Sometimes there's even more or less. It just probably not more. Not a hotter signal, rather. You're probably not going to run into very many microphones. I can't think of one that has a sensitivity hotter than negative 20 dB. But there's probably, some very insensitive microphones that they're so rude, that actually have even more lower gain. I think maybe even like the Shure Beta 87, Beta 87 that I think I've used, Beta 780, 87A, I think that one actually has a very low sensitivity. I think it's like negative 50 or something like that. But that's a condenser microphone. But it's designed for you to use in an environment like screaming into on a stage. But if you were to use a condenser microphone, it amplifies a little bit for you. So part of the gain, or part of the 48 volts phantom power is used for things like that. So you kind of need to talk about an unpowered microphone like a dynamic if you really want to test the preamps, because there is no amplification coming from the phantom power. So when you're looking at a dynamic microphone, you basically are comparing the actual integrated, circuitry or the internals on the microphone, and there's going to be a certain amount of noise that comes out of it regardless of your interface. It is going to sound on the cleanest of preamps more or less the same, more or less. If you're working with a system that does not have as clean preamps, that's when you're really going to need additional clean gain, and that's when something like a cloud lifter, Fed head, something like that's going to come into handy. But the main point I'm driving home here is that if you were to have an interface and you're trying to give yourself the best possible noise performance, all else equal, I would optimally go for an interface with more gain than one with less. For the next topic, I thought we would talk about boom pole length and how to select the ideal length for your first boom pole and second boom pole and third and whatever. Because this is a topic that I'm quite often asked about, being that this is what I do for a living. So usually what I recommend someone to do is get yourself, if you're going to buy yourself a first boom pole, you want to try to usually aim for something that's about 16 to 18 feet. As a first boom pole, that's probably going to be the equivalent of a driver for you. So like a D1 driver in golf. That's the one that you're going to be able to use to play the long game. But at the same time, you may say, well, drivers aren't great for putting. Well, you're right. So let's forget about the golf analogy when it comes down to it. And let's just call it a driver. It is a driver, but the thing is, you can still boom something that's closer. Now, the biggest issue you're going to run into with a very long boom is the collapse length. So if you're talking about getting an 18-foot boom, for example, is it 4 sections, 5, or 6 sections? If it's 6, it'll collapse down to maybe 3 or 4 feet, somewhere in that realm. If it is a 4-section boom, though, it's probably going to be closer to around 5 feet, maybe even taller when it's collapsed all the way. You need to have that length because of the way the carbon fiber segments telescope out. And so when you're talking about boom poles, I usually tell people to go for a boom pole that will give you the length you need first up. You might end up being in a situation where you're going inside of an elevator or some type of a really tight place, and having yourself a boom pole that's like 5 feet long might not be the ideal place for you to the ideal environment for you to have a big boom in. And that's the kind of place that you might want to get yourself something very small. But I tell you, it's better for you to have something that longer than not, because most of the time sets are going to be big enough for you to use it. Now, you could very easily say, I think I might go for something that's 14 to 16 feet. Hey, that's a preference. That's certainly an option.
But what I usually recommend is usually somewhere between about 16 and 18 feet usually for your first boom pole. Now, it's according to your preferences as to how much of that length you get. Like if you get a 16-footer, you get an 18-footer, whatever, it's your choice as to what you get. And you could go for lower. But usually as a second boom pole, I recommend someone to get something that's around 12 feet. Now, you may say, doesn't a 18-foot boom also collapse down to 12 feet? Well, it does. But here's the thing. Most of the time, if you're shooting indoors, you only need a boom pole that's up to about 12 feet. About 90% of the booming that I do indoors, probably even more than that, is done with a boom pole that's not even 12 feet. It's a little bit less than, actually. By the time you add the shock mounts and stuff like that to it, it might be around 12 feet. The boom pole I usually use actually has a flow through on the bottom of it, even though I no longer have it internally cabled. So it's one of those things where I use that for the extra little bit of length, and it's about 12 feet roughly, plus or minus a little bit. So the reason I like that pole is because you don't need to have a super long boom pole for most of what you do. And going back to the golf analogy, this might be a good place for you to use it. If you have your driver, your D1, then you might also want to have a putter. Because, yeah, you could technically use the putter for the finesse game, when you get close. And having something that will drive it a long distance, and maybe you don't hit it nearly as hard. If you only had 2 golf clubs, there's probably golf pros out there that would say, no, you idiot, you don't go for a driver in that case, at least go for a D3. Or they may say, go for a 1 iron because you'll at least get most of the way there. You're going to have better precision or whatever. There's probably golf people out there that say your analogy sucks, and that's fine. I'm not a golfer. But what I will tell you is that for my purposes in this analogy, I want you to bear with me a little bit here. So if you were to get something for the short game, like putt-putting, if you like putting on the green, I guess it is, versus the fairway, fairlane. I'm terrible at golf. I should stop the golf analogies. Here's the main point I'm making, though. Get something that is going to give you the length you need, and get something that's going to not be so heavy that when you extend it out, maybe, 6, 8, 10 feet, you can hold the boom in your hands. Because here's the thing. The longer the boom pole is that you're holding, the more weight you have to hold constantly. So if you're booming indoors and you don't ever exceed 10 or 12 feet, why would you want to have a boom that you use for most of that time that exceeds 10 or 12 feet? Now, you could buy boom poles that are 6, 8, 10, 12, 16, and 18 feet or 20 feet if you wanted to, and just swap them out constantly. You can do that. There's no harm in saying that that's fine. It kind of becomes a little bit nutsy, though, in my opinion, if you start to go too many booms and you have too many of them on set. The main reason is because you could very easily say, I'll need the short boom here or the long boom here. But when it comes down to picking one boom and then you say, well, they're about 8 feet away, I'm going to grab the 8-footer. Oh, geez, what happens if you need to extend out a little bit more when you do a roll and restart? So you say, okay, I'm going to go for the 10-footer. That's fine, but what happens again if you end up having to go all the way full stick with the boom pole and then you need a little bit more length, or you want to have a little bit more for a counterweight? It's always a good idea to carry a little more boom, not much, but a little bit more just in case. A little bit of an insurance policy. So what I usually tell people is your first boom should be the one you could boom pretty much everything with, a 16 to 18 footer. When you want to get another boom, that's usually one that you get to be about, 12 feet or so, 11 or 12, as a rule. And the reason why, all the way up to like 14 feet. If your first boom, let's say, is 20 feet, get one that maybe goes up to 13 or 14 feet. No harm in that. There's some really good booms out there that you could easily balance, the short game with the long game and dial it in exactly where you want it to be. It's very important for you to do this because when you're booming something short, you don't want to carry a whole lot of extra weight. When you're booming something long, you might need it for leverage and want to even pull on a little bit more just in case. That's my philosophy. As a rule, though, those are the two main sizes you need. There are some booms, like if you watch my Mighty Boom review, I said, if you wanted to just get away with a KP16 like the one that I reviewed, you're probably going to be okay. Even in the short game, because of the weight distribution and how it's very light. If you and it starts to feel more that way, the more you extend it. The boom, the K-Tech boom, is not necessarily lighter than other booms that are the same length, but its weight distribution is different. Part of it's because it has more sections. Part of it's because it's just designed to be lighter in your hands with less front weight, feeling as much of it because you hold more in your hands until you extend it out there. The weight distribution does matter as part of the design of a boom pole. But if you go for those two main sizes, then what do you get after that? Well, it might be beneficial for you to get something very small, like an elevator pole. At that point, you might be able to get something that's very, very small and very, very tight that extends out no more than maybe 6 feet. If you do any kind of on the road, if you're an ENG shooter or something like that, collapsing down to maybe 8 feet and having that be your boom pole that you hide inside of a Pelican or your luggage might be the ideal size for you. I'm talking about feature-length boom poles that you would get when you're doing a motion picture or television show. In that circumstance, you really want to get something that is those sizes and then have yourself something that's smaller. Now, what happens then? Once you've got that third boom, at that point, if your longest boom is maybe 16 to 18 feet, you might consider getting something that's longer, getting something that's 21 or 22 feet, just so that way you can completely throw your back out every now and then whenever you need to go super long with something over some actors and put the microphone over someone that does not have a lav on. So that's always the beneficial thing as well. Sometimes you might have to boom from the upper floor of something like a conference center or something like that, or the upper floor of a building. You might have to have that extra length to extend down, in which case it comes in handy to have extra length. There's been a few movies that I've done where to defeat the lighting, I've had to come in from an upper level. I had to do that on the movie Cell at the very beginning sequence with John Cusack running around when the phone started to squeal and make noises and turn people all crazy. Well, in that circumstance, I had to have a super long boom. I think I used a 21 or 22 footer, and I had to boom from the top level of the Georgia World Congress Center that was shot in using it as a airport. I had to do that almost full stick in order to chase him around for some situations because the camera was looking around real quickly, tightly, 360, and in order to not be in the way of everybody running around panicking and stun people and players and stuff like that, I had to play from above. And it sounded just fine because it was an action sequence. But, that would be the way I would usually go. Your first boom, 16 to 18 feet. Second boom, maybe around 10 to 12 to maybe as much as 14 feet. 14 feet maybe if your first boom was maybe 18 or 20 feet. Your next pole, maybe an elevator pole. And then your last one, your fourth one at least, would be a super long, like a long one if you need it for some reason. That's usually what I recommend people to get. And why? Well, there you have it for another episode of the Speed Balance Podcast. Now, I thought I'm going to really quickly elaborate on something I said at the beginning of the episode, and that is the reason why I don't ask for likes, shares, subscribes, and donations. I know I kind of said earlier that I don't ask for it because the way I think about it is if you care about joining this channel, you will. If you want to share it, it's because you choose to. You find it valuable. If there's something in particular that you want to support, you'll join the membership or the Patreon, or you'll send a donation. Those are your choices. You will do that if you want to. I am not of the philosophy or the mindset that you just need to do these things because a content creator says, you must like my video, you must share it. A lot of the times it really irritates me when people say straight out of the gate, you need to share my video, it really help me out. I haven't given you any reason to actually like me or my content. I know you happen to search for this video, you happen to find it, but I'm going to now, after doing this nice long intro, I'm going to go and do this intro with my special music and everything, and then I say, welcome back, and let me recap my intro for you. Again, tell you to like, share, subscribe, and donate, and then I finally give you the material you actually came to the channel for. I don't like doing that. In my opinion, SoundSpeeds is a niche of a niche of a niche type channel. If I wanted to concentrate on something that's more broad, like consumer audio, I could probably have a much bigger channel. I'm sure that if I told people to like, share, subscribe, and donate, they would do that. But I don't want to. To me, if you are watching this channel because you are subscribed, it's because you get value out of what I produce. If you don't want to watch all my videos, that's fine. Some people say, I'm not going to watch certain videos. I'm only here for certain types of content, like the pro audio stuff. A few people have told me also they really like speed bumps, which is why we're doing this, and we're going to continue doing this throughout 2023 at least. I'm going to see how the views go throughout the year. So far, I'll tell you, The performance has been kind of spotty on the Speed Bonus podcast. Some people really like it. Some people just are kind of whatever. Some people will watch it and listen regardless. This episode will be interesting because I'll be looking in the comments to see what you think about the audio. But the main thing here is that if I wanted to concentrate on more broad topics, I would probably pull in a bigger audience and funnel them in. But I don't. I concentrate on a very small portion of the kind of audio out there. I like to concentrate on pro audio topics. I like to concentrate on film and video type, content. And I'm not one of these guys that does a YouTube channel. It's all about filmmaking, and this is like the general topic that we talk about every single week is something to do with filmmaking and stuff that you can do at home and how to make your own audio and picture and whatever else sound better. And I'm going to be a multi-channel. Look, I used to be in camera a long time ago. I was a shooter back in the 90s. I know what it takes to produce video. Now, granted, it's totally different than back in those days because at the time we were shooting analog. All video that you ran into was like, you could get yourself an SVHS camera and get better than home video. You could get a high 8 video camera. Even if you wanted to get a 3-channel SVHS camera, something like the JVC GYX2B, that's one of the things that I shot with back in the 90s. You could, or get Betacam SP and use Betacam. Like a UVW100 was one of the big Betacam SP cameras. I think there was like a DXC or something like that. Then there was like a BWP or BVP, something like that. I can't remember the highest end. I can't remember those model numbers. If you're if you were a shooter back in the 90s and you remember those cameras, there was like 3 different stages of Betacam SP. Please tell me in the comments because sometimes I'll try to remember the old things and I'm, the old gear. And then I'm like, you know what? It's not important. Why bother looking it up? Because I'm never going to need it again. I mean, you could probably buy those things really cheap on eBay now. But they were the top of the line back then. But now the resolution on your camera is like, 20 times higher. It's crazy. But anyway, so I used to be in camera, but I was a shooter. I started learning audio. I found that there was a lot that I really liked about it. I could have probably gone, when I first started my first movies, I probably could have gone into camera or gone into sound. And I got a call first from a sound person to do movies. Now, you may say, well, why didn't you transition into camera? Well, I like sound. I kind of fell into it and fell in love with it. And doing it, there's a bit of charm. I also like being on set as the boom operator right there, not necessarily being part of the creative team that picks shots and chooses them, but there's a lot of a challenge, and I've always been up for a challenge, in trying to find the best way to position a microphone, getting it in exactly the sweet spot. And sound is one of those things that requires you to get it right the first time most of the time. Sometimes it takes a little while to dial in something, but I'll tell you this, being able to get something right the first time is something we really strive for in the sound department, and to me, that is awesome. I really like that. This tweaking it, making it better is always great, but I really like the whole, diving in there deep, seeing how I could best get it on the very first take based on inconsistent or incomplete information with people who don't know how to hit marks. These are actors I'm talking about, and camera people that are just not knowing necessarily what the shots are going to be that they're doing. I really like it. There's a challenge to it. That's one of the reasons why I'm still a boom operator now and not a sound mixer. I like being on set where the action is. And being a boom operator has become a really good fit for me, I feel. And there may be a time that I end up getting injured or need to make a transition at some point into another aspect of sound. I'm probably never going to be in the camera department. But I can tell you this also. I have thought about it from time to time. What would have happened if I did go into camera? I mean, I am one of those guys that gets along with everybody, so I probably would be accepted just fine at camera. A lot of the people that I talk to on set are camera people. They're a lot of fun. And they're not all the jerks and the stuck-up whatever else that people always seem to think of them as. Now, I jokingly sometimes say, yeah, they're stuck up or whatever if I wanted to be whiny and be in camera, but no, that's not really the case. They're actually really awesome. But I like being in sound. To me, there's something that's really cool about being a sound person and really tweaking it out, learning how to overcome challenges. And that's kind of the training I'm in. I've kind of trained myself to get ready for this job pretty much my whole life. customer service skills from using it at places like Arthur Anderson before Enron took it down, and things like customer service over at in tech support or customer service at different companies. Like I was even in Earthlink tech support for a while, and I was a team leader. I was a lead photography for a big photography company for a while, and I was in addition to training and mentoring, I did quality assurance, stuff like that. I had to be able to charm a customer. So a lot of the training I have is technical. I also understand cameras because I used to teach people on that. I also have a martial art background, and some of what we did was with weapons. So I kind of learned the balance in the way that you would hold things like staffs and swords and things like that. And I used a lot of the balance techniques and stuff like that I learned in martial arts to handling boom poles. And it's really kind of cool to me how my entire career, my entire life is kind of culminated into what I'm doing right now, and how I'm doing it. So I'm very happy where I am, and I really like doing it. So hopefully you're actually getting value out of my little goofiness and deciding to stay in this little sound world as opposed to jumping into camera where all the money is. And I mean, quite frankly, I could probably rent a lot of things and make a lot of money in camera. If I wanted to try to transition by the time maybe I was 50, I could probably easily, with the people I know, say, look, I'm looking to transfer into camera, maybe be an AC or something like that, and probably could get myself in as a utility or something like that, work my way up. I just don't want to. I know I'm not going to ever make nearly as much money as I could in camera. I mean, people that are utilities and simply just, shuttle around data and stuff like that on many shows will make more than I do as a boom operator. But, personal fulfillment is also something that I really like. And I like the fit I have as a boom operator. I mean, what do you expect me to do? Camera speeds as a YouTube channel? No, I'm happy with sound speeds. So that gives you a little bit of insight as to why I do what I do. And I know you didn't ask for it, and I thank you for staying in and staying in until the very, very end. I'm smiling because it's like, that's kind of silly. But anyway, thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Speed Bumps Podcast, and I will see you in 2 weeks with yet another episode.
If you'd like to ask a sound-related question to be answered in a future episode, send text, audio, or video to ssp@soundspeeds.us. Want to record this outro? Details in the description below. Find us on social media and online at www.soundspeeds.us.